Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Future of XYZ. I couldn't be happier to introduce our guest, Nathan Havey, to Future of XYZ. Nathan, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here, Lisa. Thank you.
And today we're going to be talking about something that you're really invested in, which is the concept of the future of beyond zero. You obviously are the co-founder of the Institute for Corporate Transformation, which I want to talk about in terms of what you are doing. You also wrote and directed a documentary about Ray C. Anderson, the founder of Interface, a carpet tiling company that was one of the first true, I would say, pioneers in sustainable or what we want to call conscious capitalism, and we want to get into that. The movie is called Beyond Zero and was released in 2020, and it won all sorts of acclaim. You have a master's in public policy from George Washington University. You run a podcast about stakeholder capitalism. So I really feel like I want to get into the meat of what is Beyond Zero from your perspective.
Great. Yeah. And so, Lisa, I think the thing that we want to do is kind of set Beyond Zero apart from net zero. So, with Paris and with a lot of the COP26 conversation, companies are really striving to reduce their greenhouse gas footprint to a place where they are net zero. And so to get net zero, a lot of folks are buying carbon credits. They might be doing some things to actually reduce what they're emitting, but there's usually a mix there. So it's not actually zero, it's just net zero. We'll emit here, we'll pay to not cut down a forest over there, and we'll call it net zero. And that is progress, right? That's great. We need to do that. And the thing that I learned in the Interface story that inspired me to make a movie about it is that Interface actually took it further than that, and they changed the conversation from how do we do less bad to how do we actually become something that is good for the environment. How do we actually pull carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it in our production processes instead of just trying to emit less?
Do less.
And there's a state shift, I think, when companies start playing a game to look at what their opportunities are to go beyond zero, to not just be net zero, but actually what happens when you go beyond that so that your processes are actually in line with the life supporting systems of the planet Earth. And Interface is an incredible example of what that can actually look like.
Well, it's so interesting because when we first connected, I, of course, shared that the Interface example was one of my first awakenings to conscious capitalism in the 2006 book, From Green to Gold, that was written by Yale professor Daniel Esty. And it was one of these examples where, my jaw kind of hit the floor. I remember I was at business school, I was in Singapore, which to me was just like this, unbelievable waste factory. And based on the consumption and the way the energy was consumed. And I was seeking something, I'd gone to business school to talk about sustainability, and I was blown away being in Southeast Asia by the waste. And then I'm reading this book, and it was saying, okay, carpet tiles, which was Interface's business, or is Interface's business, right? Historically have been, especially industrial grade, are petroleum-based product. And Ray C. Anderson, the founder of Interface, multi-generational entrepreneur, had this realization himself, like, ooh, like, is that what I want to be doing? Is that my legacy, in fact? And went on this huge journey, which I think Beyond Zero just covers so brilliantly, of shifting his entire corporation, which is publicly listed, over, right, to a stakeholder capitalist model that had employees on board, had suppliers on board, of course, had clients on board, and has continued to outpace growth of any of their competitors over the course of the last 40 years.
That's right. And the interesting thing that Ray saw, he was an engineer by training, and his engineer's mind really just quickly accepted the case that Paul Hawken lays out in the book, the Ecology of Commerce, where he really shows that the major life support systems on Earth are all in decline. And the biggest culprit of that is industry. And Ray Anderson said, my God, it's me, I'm doing this. And so you sort of face this trade-off choice of, okay, well, then do you just shut down all of industry and go back to a pre-industrial quality of life on Earth? Or do you just ignore the warning signs and let the good times roll and, leave it for future generations to clean up?
Which
And
is
Ray
what
said,
we've been doing.
it is what we've been doing, but not Ray. Ray said, this is ours to handle, and there is a way to cause what he called a second industrial revolution, to figure out how industrial processes can actually be retooled to be in line with natural processes so that you don't have to make the trade-off. You resolve it. You can still have progress. You can still have modernity. You just do it in ways that are beyond zero, where they're actually restorative and regenerative for the environment. And so Interface, probably more than any other company on Earth, has been able to really get there. Are they perfect? No. In fact, they won't even say that they are fully sustainable because they're not.
Right.
But they are so far along, it's really incredible. And at the end of the film, they announced that they actually are releasing these carpet tiles that sequester more carbon than is created in their manufacture. And those were indeed made available all around the world in 2020. And so it's a major breakthrough that hopefully the rest of industry can follow.
Which is, I think you've touched on so many interesting points, and I could pull on lots of threads here, Nathan. But one of the things I want to just ground listeners in, we talked about what net zero is. And of course, in November last year, governments and businesses to some degree, but mostly governments, got together and for what is, the climate action change, climate change conference. It's the 26th year, ergo COP26, that these guys have gotten together. And this time it's really, okay, the Paris Agreement, where are we going with it? What are kind of UN commitments? And it's basically a race to net zero by 2050, which of course is a long way off and a short time off. It's like, we know that we need to take action long before that, and we need a ramp up to get to 2050. And it's going to require all stakeholders, from governments, to businesses, to each of us individually, to do this. But you talked about something in the interface release of new product, but also in general. One of these ways of getting there, of course, is carbon sequestration, right?
That's right.
Some of the others, I think, obviously less waste in general, more regenerative, forms of electricity. So moving to solar, wind, hydro, instead of away from, coal, as, we look at what Germany's just announced. They're going to try to figure out how to move away from coal. And so away from fossil fuels, you have to use biofuels, hydrogen, there are all sorts of amazing tools out there. But where your business, the Institute for Corporate Transformation, really focuses isn't on the how, the what of the action, right? It's much more on the how and the why. Let's talk about the psychology, and especially in corporate culture, of moving to a future of beyond zero.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting, Lisa, because as we were finishing the film, I had a chance to ask Erin Mizan, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Interface, why aren't there more interfaces? What's holding it back? And she said it's not because of technology, because the technology exists for us to do this. It's not because of sort of the other sorts of technical know-how of measurement and metrics and the policy regime. All of that is there. She said that the reason that more companies aren't doing this is actually because people don't understand how you actually shift a company, how you transform a corporation. And so, with the Institute, we've sort of defined these four spaces that are required for a wholesale corporate transformation. One of them, and first and foremost, is the CEO, the executive leadership of the company. They need to sort of expand the scorecard for success that they are playing against for business. Because, for 50 years, we've been playing in the Milton Friedman scorecard that is about growing profit and shareholder return. That is the scorecard of business. And you do have to have profit. A company that doesn't make profit is not going to be around very long. But there's a lot of interesting research. The Mars Corporation, for example, has done this thing. It's called the Economics of Mutuality, where they've actually identified that when a company is able to measure and manage not just financial capital, but environmental capital, which is all of the things that are the life-sustaining systems on Earth, social capital, which is the quality of networks and human relationships, and human capital, which is wellness and well-being. When you're managing for environmental, social, and environmental capital, you actually produce superior financial capital returns because you're not eroding the other kinds of capital because you're so myopically focused on that. And when you hear people critique capitalism, it's usually because they see people prioritizing money over those other forms of capital. Well,
which we could call externalities in the business world, or you could look at it positively, which is where I wrote some of my college thesis, which is about mutualism, right?
Yes.
It's mutual respect, mutual give back, and working together.
Yes.
It really forms the basis of stakeholder capitalism, because it includes all stakeholders, people, planet, as well as profit, obviously.
That's exactly right. And what we're seeing is that it's almost like an upgraded operating system for capitalism, right? There's this one that produces these certain results, but if you're still running, Windows 96 on your computer, it's inefficient, it's clunky, it does not work nearly as well as when you can actually update to the latest operating system. And so it's not a trend, it's just sort of a re-examination of the fundamental benefits of a free market system, looking at what the actual goals of that system are, which is to meet the needs of humanity, right? Within the environmental confines of the world, because
of the planet.
we can't meet the needs of humanity in the future if we exhaust all that stuff now. So it's just a more holistic view. And so if executives start to understand that their scorecard for success is actually measured on all four of those kinds of capital, not just on one, then it begets very different investments and innovations in ways that you do things. So if an executive makes that shift, exactly.
Right. As we're in a race for talent right now in the Great Resignation, I have to believe, you're making a new film, and a lot of it has to do with how do you incentivize, good employee engagement and loyalty. And it's a fact, it seems so obvious sometimes from the outside, but it's again to that change management conversation, shifting an entire corporate, incentive structure, pay structure, give back. And then the attitudes is massive, right? So
all of that.
I experienced a little bit of it at Chobani as, coming in right after the shares were given to all employees, including hourly workers on the plant. I think the movie that you're making now, which I'd love you to talk about a little bit, because it's definitely, again, a new lens on Beyond Zero.
Yeah, totally. And if I may, it's just all the things that you're saying. That's why it's so hard, because in most corporations, almost everybody has either been formally trained in the Milton Friedman paradigm of business, or they've osmosed it because they've been around other people where that's just the way they think, right?
I like osmosed it. It's good.
Yeah, shifting that is something that it's not easy, and it's not okay, we're going to do this now. No. There's a lot of real interesting sort of discussions and education, and people really have to get this in their heart as much as in their mind to really make the shift. And so the executive team and the board, key investors, they've all got to be on board for this. And then you've got to show employees exactly what they can do in their roles to help to materially shift the what's happening in the business. So it can't be a top-down thing, which is where most of these efforts fail. It really has to be. There's a scholar named Leith Sharp that teaches an incredible executive education program at Harvard on this, and she calls it the hierarchical network and the adaptive network, which is the relationships in and between the hierarchy. If you can engage both of those things effectively, then that's really what it is. And so we've been able to work with Leith to license some of this content and get it out there with our programs at the Institute. But those things together, plus you've really got to look at the accounting systems in companies are set up for systems? The accounting systems, accounting and finance, they're set up for financial capital. So what does it look like for accountants to begin to account for the other kinds of capital? And that's what the folks at the Economics of Mutuality have done so well. They've even got, like a P&L for all of those different kinds of capital. And that's the future. That's where we've got to get to.
And this is really where ESG kind of, I think, is heading, right? I mean, there are all these, we used to talk about CSR, right? I mean, first of all, you talked about sustainability, back in 2008, 2009, when I was out there looking, it was, sustainability, you don't have any experience in it. And I'm like, we don't have a shared definition of it. What do you mean I don't have experience in it, And I feel like we still don't. We just keep bouncing around to these terminologies, that are like hip and happening for companies and investors to latch onto, to say, we're not harming, we do sustainability. And then it's like, oh, we do CSR, corporate social responsibility. Now it's like, well, we have ESG measures in place, environmental social governance, right? It's like, at the end of the day, you actually need a P&L that properly, and a balance sheet, frankly, that properly reflects your impact, not only on profit.
That's right.
I mean, at the end of the day, that is how this is going to shift. So I want to talk about that because I think you said it very interesting at the beginning, which is Ray C. Anderson, going back to the Beyond Zero movie and documentary about interface, he realized it couldn't just be him at the top. You can't shove it down. And that's what you just said. Cultural transformation has to, all those networks that you were talking about, tools, it's a journey, it's a process. I want to understand, in order to get to the future of Beyond Zero, we are going to require every government, every small business, and every massive corporation, every nonprofit, every organizing everything of humanity to kind of shift culturally, mindset, and then have the tools such as, a P&L that reflects everything. How in the world, if you were just to say 3 things, that people could start small with, that we get to a future beyond zero? Because, that's where we need to head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the thing that any individual can do, there's an initiative that the Institute for Corporate Transformation is helping to catalyze, and it's called 100 Months to Change. And it's a global network of people that are interested in this, that are sort of looking at what they can do and learning from their peers in other countries for exactly what to do. And one of the things that we've kind of looked at is that every individual has sort of 3 places that they can be very effective. So one of them is obviously in your personal life, in your household, the behavior that you have, making sure that you're using your dollars and your behavior in a way that's consistent with a sustainable world. And we don't do this naturally. This is not, all the marketing messages that we get all the time encourage us to do the opposite of this.
Amazon.
And so yeah, right. You've got to really look at what is it for you, right? And so, there's lots of resources that are out there to look at this, but that's one place that all of us can be very effective. The other place is that most of us work in some kind of an organization. And so to begin to advocate for this kind of conversation within the organization, even in small ways, it doesn't have to be big change. You don't have to convince the CEO, but in your job, right where you are, what is it that you could do? And for some people, it's a recycling program in the office, and then you just try to scale it. But what do you touch? What is it that's in your sort of your grasp to be able to do? Start there, talk with other people in your company about it, and there's a lot of very interesting stories that start this way, and then run it out 2 or 3 years, and you have actually created a massive cultural shift within the company. So all of us is able to do that, and again, that's what Leith Sharp's work is we don't have to have a formal position of power. We just have to be pretty savvy about how to network the relationships and talk with folks and understand what's important to them and how it can really be mutual. How can you both win, right? And then
this ties really nicely to my episode just a couple of weeks ago on the future of power with another Harvard professor who talks about basically the democratization of power. It's what is the resource that people need and who has access and control of that resource. So.
Yes. And there are ways, it doesn't have to turn into a big fight where you have to beat the other side. That whole ethos is off, because a lot of times if you come in working collaboratively, you'll find there are great ways to do this, which is awesome. And then the third and final place that we can all be effective is actually in our communities. So wherever you live in your town, you're a citizen. You can actually have tremendous impact. And there's this one story that Leith tells of a pair of women in Boston that didn't have a position of hierarchical authority in the government or in a gas company or anything, but they succeeded in kind of creating this situation where Boston got really aggressive about patching all of the gas leaks in its old main, which was, I think, the second or third biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Boston was leaking gas. And so they went in and they were able to, with no position of hierarchical authority, actually get the city bought in, the gas company bought in, everybody saved a bunch of money, and Boston cut its greenhouse gas gas emissions tremendously. And that was just 2 individuals. And so all of us can do that. We can't do it overnight, but we absolutely can start to just educate ourselves and our neighbors about what is it that's going to make the biggest difference here, and how can we go forward and try to make that change. And so that can happen in your household, in your company or organization, and in your community. And frankly, we all in this decade are going to need to start playing those games pretty aggressively if we're going to be where we need to be in 2030.
I think it's such a powerful place to end, but I do want to just share one quote that was about Beyond Zero, because Beyond Zero is not because of when you released it right before COVID and hit all the film festivals and you won a bunch of awards, right? But it is now available for corporations to lease out, if you will, and do on their own and do a learning journey with. But I think the most powerful quote I heard about it comes from probably one of the best possible advocates you could have, who is Pullman, who was until reasonably recently the CEO and chief executive of Unilever, one of the world's largest packaged goods companies. And he was an advocate for conscious capitalism all the way through. And he's a member of the board of the United Nations Global Compact as well. So someone deeply invested in this. And he said about Beyond Zero that it is a fascinating story, not only about inspirational and visionary founder Ray C. Anderson, but the struggles and determination of a company trying to become a positive force in the world. The film delivers a message that needs to be told. In the end, it indeed boils down to people, and business can be more successful and resilient simply by doing the right thing. This idea of the right thing and the knock-on effects of that go so far, and it's so fundamentally human, right? I mean, we are not bad at our core, is my fundamental belief. We want to do good, and we have just gotten so out of touch with that basic nature. I think a lot of what you have shared about the individual power to enact change and do better and get us on this journey towards Beyond Zero really speaks to what Paul quoted about the film. So I'm going to encourage everyone to go reach out. Nathan, give us a plug.
Sure. Yeah. So beyondzerofilm.com. The movie is not yet publicly available, but we're looking for impact partners. So these are private individuals and companies that can help to support the film at a level of $10,000. For that, they get a kind of a talk back and a private screening for any audience that they would want to convene to watch the film. They get acknowledged in the film's credits, and then what we seek to do with the revenues raised is make the film first available to all educators in business schools at every level all around the world at no cost to them, build curriculum materials to help them teach this and kind of this new paradigm of business we've been talking about, and then actually have a distribution budget so that we can help to get this film into the mainstream as best we can. Our goal is to be in classrooms and boardrooms in at least the world's top 20 economies and beyond. So if you are interested in that, details at beyondzerofilm.com. And if you're an educator or somebody that is interested in screening this in your classroom, there's some forms to get in touch with me and our team at that website as well.
Nathan, it is a powerful and very compelling point of view on the future of Beyond Zero. Thank you for joining us on Future of XYZ today.
This is my pleasure, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
And everyone listening and watching, if you don't already subscribe, make sure you do. Future of XYZ is available on YouTube, as well as on a podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And be sure to follow us on Future of XYZ on Instagram, and visit future-of.xyz if you or someone you know would like to be a guest in 2022 or beyond. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Nathan, thank you for everything you're doing to bring us closer to a future of Beyond Zero.